the abduction. John Carter was just an ordinary guy, 25 years old, jobless after being laid off, and heading home from a quiet walk at night. The street was empty, silent, and dimly lit by the broken streetlights. He liked this part of the evening, when no one bothered him, when the world felt quiet, almost peaceful. He had earbuds in, listening to music, lost in thought about his uncertain future. Rent was due, groceries were low, and he hadn't spoken to his family in weeks. Life was dull, boring, normal. Then, everything changed in a flash. Literally, a sudden beam of light exploded from the sky, brighter than the sun, and slammed into him. He didn't even have time to scream. His body froze, lifted from the ground as if gravity had forgotten him. The music in his ears stopped, and the world turned white. When John opened his eyes, the first thing he noticed was that he couldn't move. He wasn't tied up, but some invisible force held his limbs stiff. He was lying on a smooth, cold table, in a room that looked like it was made of liquid metal. Strange shapes pulsed along the walls, glowing blue. The air smelled sterile, like a hospital, and he wasn't alone. Standing around him were 5 tall figures. They were not human. No way. Each stood at least 7 feet tall, with smooth, lavender skin, narrow glowing eyes, and long silver-white hair that shimmered like mist. Their bodies were lean, elegant, and strangely feminine. They wore no armor, just soft robes with flowing patterns. But their eyes were cold and sharp, examining him like a machine would examine a tool. "What the hell is this?" John muttered, his voice barely audible. "He is awake," one of the aliens said in a melodic, almost musical tone. Another stepped closer, holding a tablet-like device that projected strange lights over his body. "Vital signs are stable. Human male, unmodified. Fertility markers, active, remarkable." They all murmured something in their language, a series of clicks and hums, and then nodded as if confirming something serious. One of them leaned forward. Her face was striking, not ugly, but alien in a way that made John's skin crawl. Her eyes were deep purple, filled with intelligence and curiosity. "You have been selected," she said calmly. "You are compatible. Welcome, human breeding material." John blinked. "What?" She didn't repeat herself. "You've got the wrong guy," he said. "I don't even have a girlfriend." The aliens ignored his protest. 2 of them began scanning him with devices, while another took a sample of his blood. It didn't hurt. It was like his nerves had been turned off. He couldn't resist. He couldn't even flinch. "You are healthy," another alien said. "You may be the solution." "To what?" John shouted. "Let me go." "Where am I?" Finally, one of them responded. "You are on board the vessel Elypris. You were chosen from your planet for a specific genetic purpose. Our species is at the edge of extinction. Human males are biologically compatible with our reproductive systems. You are not a prisoner. You are an asset." John's mind spun. You kidnapped me too. Breed." The silence in the room said it all. They didn't see it as a crime. To them, this was science. Survival, maybe even mercy. "You can't just take people," John yelled. "I'm a human being, not some damn lab rat." Still, the aliens remained cold, logical, and emotionless, except one. She stood slightly behind the others, her gaze softer, her hands clenched nervously. Her robe was a darker blue, and she seemed younger than the others. Her eyes met John's for a moment, and she looked away quickly, almost ashamed. She didn't speak, but something about her expression made John feel like maybe not all of them agreed with this. The leader stepped forward again. "You will be given a choice. Cooperation will result in comfort, care, and privileges. Refusal will not change your purpose, only your experience." John's heart pounded. This couldn't be real. He wasn't some hero. He wasn't a soldier or a scientist, just a guy who wanted a sandwich and some sleep. Now he was lying on an alien ship, being told he was some sort of universal baby maker. He laughed bitterly. This has to be a dream. The younger alien girl took a small step forward. The others looked at her in surprise. "We should let him speak," she said quietly. "He deserves to know everything." The leader stared at her, but didn't object. John looked at the girl. "What's your name?" She hesitated. "Lyra." "Okay, Lyra," John said. "Please tell me what's going on. Tell me this isn't real." Her eyes lowered. "It is real. And you You may be the only hope left for our kind. The lights above dimmed as a humming sound filled the room. The table began to rise, and mechanical arms folded away into the walls. The aliens stepped back. Lyra looked at him again, and this time, her eyes were full of something the others lacked, guilt, and fear. John's voice was dry. What happens now? The leader answered without emotion. Now, we begin. The truth revealed. John sat on a soft white bench in a chamber that felt like a cross between a spa and a prison cell. There were no walls, exactly just shimmering panels of energy that curved around the room like waves frozen in time. He rubbed his arms, trying to convince himself that all this was fake, that he was dreaming or hallucinating or trapped in some weird prank show, but every time he blinked he still saw the floating lights, the silver walls, and the quiet shadow of someone watching him from the corner. Lyra, the only one among the aliens who seemed to carry doubt in her eyes, she stood silently near the edge of the room, not approaching, not leaving, just watching him like she wanted to speak, but didn't know how. John finally broke the silence. You said I deserved to know everything, so talk. Why me? Why humans? And what the hell did she mean when she said begin? Lyra walked forward slowly, her feet making no sound on the glass-like floor. She stopped just a few steps away from him, her hands folded tightly in front of her. We didn't want this to happen. We didn't want to steal anyone from their home, but our species is dying. And you, John, you're not just compatible, you're unique. John shook his head. I don't understand. How can I be compatible? We're not even from the same planet. We're not even the same species. Lyra took a breath, like it pained her to say it. 100 years ago, a virus spread across our systems. It didn't kill anyone at first, but it did something far worse. It rewrote the reproductive codes in all our females, one by one, generation by generation. No girl could conceive, not naturally, not with aid, not with cloning or genetic enhancements. Everything failed. We lost hope until a rogue genetic researcher broke the law and tested DNA from a long-dead Terran sample. You mean Earth human DNA? John said. Why, yes, she nodded slowly. He discovered that your kind shares a rare genome cluster, one we lost thousands of cycles ago through evolution and artificial modification. He called it the seed pattern. It's something your males still carry, something your kind probably doesn't even realize is special. John tried to process it all. So you're saying humans are like the missing puzzle piece, that we're the only ones left with this seed thing? Lyra nodded again, and for the first time sat down beside him. Not every human has it, not every male is suitable, but you have a perfect strand, high compatibility, strong fertility markers, stable mental structure, healthy genetic memory. You're everything we need. John laughed without humor. So, that's it. You scan Earth for some poor sap with the right genes and poof, snatch him up to become some sort of space father. We needed a solution, she said quietly, and the Council doesn't believe in diplomacy with pre-contact worlds. You were taken, yes, but you were chosen carefully. You weren't random. He leaned back, his head resting against the cold wall. So what's the plan? You just line up a bunch of alien women and make me breed them like cattle. Is that the solution? Lyra looked away. I volunteered. I was the first to request pairing, not because I want a child, but because I wanted to understand you, to prove we're not monsters. John stared at her. Volunteered? That means others didn't view humans as nothing more than tools. Some don't even see you as conscious beings. You're just biological material to them. They don't care about your thoughts or feelings, but I do. I believe if we ask, if we show respect, maybe you'll choose to help us on your own. John didn't answer for a long time. His chest felt tight. Everything was moving too fast. Just hours ago he was worried about rent, and now he was being told he was the galaxy's most wanted baby daddy. He looked at her. And if I say no? Lyra's face darkened. Then you'll be sent to Facility 9. It's a genetic extraction center. You'll be kept alive but not conscious. Your cells will be harvested over and over. John's fists clenched. So those are my choices: become a father to a species, or get turned into a human juice box. I'm sorry, she said softly. I truly am. That's why I'm here, to give you a third option. He raised an eyebrow. What's that? I want you to stay with me as an equal, not a subject, not a tool. If we can prove that natural bonding works, if we show the Council that humans and my kind can connect without force, we might change everything. He stared at her, trying to find a lie in her eyes, but there was none, only hope and fear. John stood slowly. His legs were still shaky, but he faced her directly. You said I was chosen, fine, but if I'm going to be part of this, then I make my own decisions. We do it my way or not, at all. Isla nodded once, then let's begin the trial together. As they walked out of the room side by side, John felt a strange shift. Inside him, this wasn't just about survival, this was about choice, about control, and maybe, just maybe, about something deeper than either of them understood. The emotional bond John followed Lyra through a long glowing corridor that pulsed gently with light as they walked side by side, and for the first time since his abduction he wasn't being dragged or ordered or scanned. He was just walking, breathing, thinking. Everything around him was strange beyond belief, but she walked calmly ahead, as if it were all normal, and maybe for her it was. The walls around them seemed to shift in color, responding to movement or emotion or some invisible technology John couldn't begin to understand, but he kept his eyes on Lyra, her posture, her careful pace, her silence. She wasn't like the others. She didn't walk like a scientist or a soldier. She walked like someone holding a secret, and maybe that's what kept him going. They reached a chamber, unlike any other he had seen. No lights, no metal tables, no floating drones. Instead, it looked almost like a small forest sealed inside glass. Soft green trees, bioluminescent vines, a running stream with golden water, and a small shelter in the center built from curved stone and glowing crystal. "What is this place?" John asked, and his voice echoed slightly, as if the room itself was alive and listening. Lyra stepped into the grass, her bare feet sinking slightly into the moss-like floor. "This is a simulation habitat, a space created for emotional and biological bonding. It mimics nature from both our worlds to make interaction more natural, more real. We're not monitored here, not directly. This is where the trial begins." John stepped forward slowly, his boots crunching on unfamiliar ground, and for the first time in hours he didn't feel like a prisoner. He didn't feel like a lab rat being poked and scanned. Instead, he felt like a guest in something sacred. He looked around at the trees, tall with translucent leaves and bark that glowed faintly with life in the distance. Strange, bird-like creatures chirped from the branches, and the stream sparkled with moving lights. "This place is beautiful," he said quietly, and Lyra smiled. For the first time since he met her, it was designed to be calming, she said. "We believe emotional compatibility affects biological reactions. Bonding in stress leads to rejection. Bonding in peace can lead to acceptance. At least that's what the theory says." John turned to her and crossed his arms. "So we just live here together like roommates until someone gets pregnant?" he asked with a mix of sarcasm and confusion. "Not exactly," she replied. "The process is more than physical. It's about understanding, empathy, trust. We're not asking you to perform like an animal. We're asking you to choose if you want to connect with someone like me." John studied her face, again not human but expressive and honest, and something about her eyes felt real. He could sense hesitation in her movements, as if she was struggling with this more than she showed. They spent the first day in silence, sharing space, but not words. John explored the habitat, touching plants, dipping his fingers into the golden stream, eating small glowing fruit that tasted like mangoes mixed with mint. Lyra watched him quietly sitting by the stream, sketching patterns in the soil with her fingers. At night they returned to the shelter, a single chamber with two resting platforms separated by a wall of hanging vines. John lay on one side, staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft hum of the forest and wondering how the hell his life had turned into this. He thought about his apartment, the cheap couch, the leaky sink, the posters on his walls, and how none of it mattered here. He thought about Earth, his friends, his mother who'd left voicemails he never returned, and he thought about Lirette. The next day they spoke for hours. He asked her about her world, and she told him about crystalline cities that floated over ocean skies filled with twin moons and star chariots used for travel. Her people had once been rulers, scientists, explorers, but after the virus, everything changed. Fear replaced ambition, and desperation replaced pride. She asked him about Earth, and he told her about music and pizza and thunderstorms and laughter and small apartments, about failure and hope, and how humans never gave up even when they were at their lowest. The more they talked, the more the space between them shrank. They cooked meals together using strange ingredients and shared stories under glowing tree branches. They laughed awkwardly at each other's jokes, mispronounced names, and learned to respect the differences. At night, they no longer slept on opposite sides. They moved their beds closer, still separate but near. On the fourth day, something changed. They were walking along the stream when Lyra suddenly stopped. She looked at him, her expression soft but serious. John, there's something I need to tell you. I wasn't chosen for this trial because of science. I was chosen because no one else volunteered. I was the last on the list. The one everyone thought was useless. I couldn't bond with anyone, not even my own kind. John stared at her, unsure of what to say. I'm not special either, he finally said. I was just walking home, eating leftover fries, and feeling sorry for myself. Maybe they picked me because I wouldn't be missed. They stood there in silence, two broken pieces brought together by fate, or science, or something neither of them understood. Lyra reached for his hand slowly. I don't want to save my species with fear or force. If it happens, it should happen with choice, with respect, with care. John didn't pull away. Maybe we're not saving anyone. Maybe we're just figuring out if two people from different stars can care about each other without needing a reason. As they stood there, hands connected by more than science, the forest around them shimmered, and deep within the crystals a new signal awakened. The trial, the days inside the simulation habitat passed differently than time on Earth. There were no clocks, no sunsets, no calendar to follow. The bioluminescent sky above changed colors based on their emotional states, shifting from warm amber when they felt calm, to deep violet during silence, and even pale green when they laughed together. The system was always watching but never intruding. It simply responded. John had stopped counting the days because what mattered more was the feeling that something was growing between him and Lyra, something beyond the mission, something that didn't need science to measure. They had begun sleeping in the same space, though still without touching the barriers they had kept up, slowly dissolved like fog in sunlight. Each moment they shared, whether it was preparing strange meals or learning each other's languages, added layers to the trust forming between them. One morning, as John washed his face in the golden stream, Lyra appeared behind him, holding a folded cloth in her hands. Her face was serious, yet calm. Today is the moment the council has been waiting for, she said. They will run the compatibility trial at full depth. I have to request permission to initiate. The Lingjan turned to her, wiping water from his face. The link. What does that mean? Lyra stepped closer. The emotional fusion protocol. It is a non-invasive form of bonding that uses energy mapping from both minds to simulate intimacy and connection. Without needing physical contact, it shows whether two beings are capable of forming reproductive harmony, not just biologically but mentally so. Basically a psychic relationship. She nodded. Something like that, but the results are real. If we match in the simulation, the physical pairing will follow as a confirmation. John breathed slowly, trying to absorb the weight of it all. The thought of being mentally linked to someone alien to him was terrifying and vulnerable, but he looked at Lyra and knew she felt the same. And yet she stood here offering trust, not orders. Let's do it, he said finally, but on one condition: no council watching. No one deciding what this means. But Ustri hesitated for a second, then placed the folded cloth on the stone beside them and took his hand. If the system detects emotional consent, it initiates the trial on its own. We won't need to speak it twice. Their fingers intertwined, and immediately the air shifted. A low hum surrounded them, and the world around seemed to bend slightly, like heat rising from sand. The trees shimmered, the ground beneath them began to pulse, and the sky turned white suddenly. They were no longer in the forest, but standing in a space that looked like a memory, or a dream, or a mixture of both. John saw parts of his old room on Earth merged with floating structures from Lyra's world. Strange birds flew past windows that didn't exist, and soft echoes of music played in the background. But from no source he could find this. Is the simulation core? Lyra's voice sounded both near and far. Here we are not limited by time or rules. This place reflects who we are. John looked at her and saw her as both alien and human, not in body but in presence. Her skin still shimmered, her eyes still glowed, but now her expression looked familiar, like something he had known for years. He reached out without thinking, and she met him. Halfway memories flooded the space around them. John's childhood moments of loneliness, school fights, heartbreaks. His father's silence, the way he smiled through it all and kept walking. Lyra's past appeared as well. Training halls, cold political chambers, silent corridors filled with other girls like her, all afraid to admit they felt empty, all forced to smile and obey. They didn't speak, but they understood pain, hope, longing, and that quiet wish to be held without being owned. That light around them began to change, and suddenly they stood in a garden. Lyra's hand on his chest, her forehead resting, Against his and their breath in sync, the system is responding, she whispered. It senses a bond forming, deeper than logic, stronger than genetic math. John didn't know how or why, but he felt warmth in his chest, not artificial, not programmed. It was real as anything he had ever known. He pulled her into a soft embrace, and this time she didn't hesitate. The world around them exploded in light, not blinding but radiant, as if stars themselves had chosen to approve. When they opened their eyes, they were back in the habitat, lying side by side in the grass, neither speaking, just breathing. Lyra slowly touched her stomach, and her eyes widened. Something feels different, she said quietly. John sat up, his heart pounding. What do you mean? She closed her eyes for a moment, then looked at him, not with fear, but with something close to I think it worked. I think the trial bonded us completely. Alarms echoed through the chamber, soft chimes, not of danger, but of alertness. The trees changed color, the stream rippled in patterns. The council knows, she said quietly. They're coming. John stood up, his pulse racing. What do we do now? Lyra rose beside him, her face unreadable but her voice firm now. We fight for our right to choose what happens next. The threat, the habitat, no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like a stage, and the audience was closing in. Fast glowing lights now traced every surface, and the soft hum of the environment turned sharper, like it was warning them of something bigger than either of them could imagine. John and Lyra stood in silence as the air rippled and a circular portal shimmered open in the space near the edge of the habitat. From it stepped a group of alien figures, taller than Lyra, dressed in ceremonial black robes lined with silver thread. Their faces were covered with half-masks, their eyes glowing coldly behind translucent filters. The High Genetic Council, Lyra whispered. They came faster than expected. John stepped slightly in front of her, instinctively, feeling like she needed protection, though he knew they were both equally exposed. One of the masked figures stepped forward, his voice carrying a tone that was smooth yet commanding, the kind that had been trained to speak orders without questions. 87 human male code. John Carter compatibility confirmed. Emotional resonance achieved. Physical response pending. Genetic indicators present. Narrowed his eyes. Stop calling me subject. You all act like I'm some machine with a number. The figure continued without flinching. Human male is to be relocated to Facility 2 for high-yield genetic extraction. Sequence begins within 1 cycle. Lyra stepped forward, her voice sharper than before, and her spine straightened like a blade. You cannot remove him. He agreed to this trial under mutual consent. The bond was emotional, not just physical. You cannot claim him like Profitina. The council member responded. The emotional component is irrelevant. The purpose of the bond was to confirm viability, which it has. Human DNA will now be harvested to preserve our John felt his chest tighten. What does that mean, harvested? You mean taken by force? Zook will be placed under sedation, your cells replicated and distributed as required. Your current presence is no longer needed for interaction. Your contribution is completely. Lyra turned, her face burning with anger. This was never the agreement. The trial was meant to build trust, to forge understanding, not to enslave him. The lead council figure raised one gloved hand, and several armored guards stepped through the portal. They were different from the robed ones, their bodies mechanical, enhanced eyes scanning John's vitals, their hands glowing with stunned pulses. John backed up slowly, pulling Lyra with him. If they wanted to drag him out of this place, they were going to have to fight for it. You're making a mistake, he said. If you force this, if you take me like some breeding machine, you'll never create anything real. No child born from that will save your people. Only fear will spread, Lyra added. And if you take him, you'll destroy the only natural bond we've managed in decades. You'll kill the first honest connection between human and our kind. Of guards advanced, without listening, weapons raised. But before they reached John, a sudden blinding light filled the chamber, and everything for Jose's voice echoed, not from the council, not from the guards, but from the simulation itself. Emergency override initiated. Unauthorized termination of emotional protocol detected. Default protection barrier enabled. The habitat shimmered, and a dome of golden lights surrounded John and Lyra, sealing them off from the guards and council members who now stood outside the shield, unable to enter. What is this? John whispered. Lyra looked around, her eyes wide. I don't know. I think the Habitat is defending the bond. The system registered us as a true pair. Maybe it's trying to protect its results. The lead council member stepped forward, again lowering his hood, revealing a face marked by age and authority. Sharp cheekbones, silver eyes, lines carved from centuries of review. misunderstand the purpose of your existence. Human, you were not brought here to love. You were brought here to ensure our future. John stared back, unblinking. Then maybe your future needs more than numbers. Maybe it needs people. The elder's face remained expressionless. Remove the Domexis denied system. Responded only bonded pairs may dissolve protected. Protocol era turned to John. They won't stop. They'll try again and again until they break the code or break us. Then we don't give them that chance, he said. We escape. She looked at him as if he'd spoken an impossible word. There has to be a way, he said. Some route out of here, a ship, a gate, something. They're so focused on me, they might not notice if we move fast. Lyra closed her eyes, thinking, then opened them slowly. There is one route, a decommissioned travel pod near the core garden. It hasn't been used in years, but it's still listed in archives. I can access it through the inner route tunnels, but once we leave the dome, the system won't protect us any more than. We don't hesitate, he said. We go. She nodded and placed her hand on the inner wall of the dome. It shimmered in response, sensing her genetic marker, and opened a thin exit, just wide enough for two BAFTAs. They ran through the forested habitat, shadows stretching and folding around them, alarms now blaring louder, the simulation resisting their exit. The system, confused between obedience and instinct, guards were mobilizing. Signals echoed through the air behind them, but John didn't look back. He ran with Lyra beside him, breath heavy, legs burning, his mind locked on one goal: freedom. The tunnel opened before them, moss-covered, glowing with faint light, and Lyra jumped in first, sliding down a winding path of root-like structures. John followed close, his body bumping against walls, twisting through the dark, narrow space. At the end of the tunnel, they saw it, a small, circular pod, dusty, unused, the hatch sealed, but flickering weakly. Lyra touched the panel. It resisted, but her voice triggered the override. Emergency activation protocol 319, species priority confirmed. Pod awakening. The hatch opened and they climbed inside the chamber. Tight the controls. Old but familiar to her. Strap in, she said. John locked himself in and the hatch sealed behind them, the pod shaking as energy surged around them. Outside, the first guard reached the tunnel entrance, but it was too late. The pod launched with a roar of fire and light, breaking through the chamber wall and vanishing into deep space, leaving behind silence, confusion, and a war they had just started. The escape plant. The pod trembled violently as it burst into deep space, metal groaning under stress. As Lyra held the controls tightly, her eyes focused and unblinking, the stars blurred past the viewport like streaks of light in a storm, while behind them the alarms of the alien vessel faded into the void. John sat strapped in beside her, clutching the armrest of his seat. His knuckles white, his breath shallow. He had never been in space, never flown anything beyond a car, and now he was traveling through the cosmos, in an escape pod barely meant to fly, let alone survive a pursuit. How far can we get in this thing? He asked, shouting over the rattling noise of failing stabilizers. Lyra answered without turning her eyes from the screen. If the propulsion cells hold, we can reach the edge of the system. There is a refueling satellite near the dead moon. A place abandoned after the collapse of the colony. They may not think to look there. And if they do think to look, he asked, then we don't stop, we jump, we go dark. We keep running until we find someone who listens, she said, and for the first time her voice wasn't full of calculation or logic. It was full of something John recognized. Desperate was risking everything for him, not just her status or her safety, but her life, and he wasn't going to let that be in vain. The pod drifted into silent flight. Once the emergency thrusters shut down, inside the lights dimmed, the systems entered stealth mode, and Lyra slumped back against her seat, her face pale, her hands shaking. John unstrapped himself and moved closer, placing a hand on her shoulder. You okay? She nodded slowly. Just drained the link. Took more energy than I expected, and overriding the system used every access code I had. I won't be able to do that again. You don't have to, he said. We made it out, and now we figure out what comes next together. Lyra looked at him for a long moment and then leaned her head against his shoulder, not as a partner in rebellion, not as a pilot or guardian, but simply as someone tired, someone who had held too much for too long. They rested in silence for a while, the stars outside floating peacefully, as if unaware of the war they had ignited. A few hours, the pod began its slow approach to the abandoned refueling station orbiting the dead moon. It was a gray, skeletal structure with broken panels, flickering lights, and empty corridors, once filled with life, now only holding silence and Ghosts, they docked manually, the hatch opening with a hiss and a jolt of stale air. John stepped out first, helping Lyra as she stumbled slightly from exhaustion. The station was cold and dark, but it held power in its bones. The old generators still beating like a sleeping heart, enough to keep life support systems stable. "We can rest here for a few days," she said. "They'll be looking for us, but they won't expect us to hide in ruins." "And after that?" he asked. "We contact someone outside the council. Someone who still believes in free will. There's a scientist named Erevan. He was cast out for saying humans should be treated with respect. He might help." Might," John repeated. "It's the best chance we have," she said, "and sometimes might is all we need." They found an old observation chamber at the top of the station, where a large dome of glass showed the full view of space and the dying moon beneath them. They set up a small camp using emergency kits from the pod heating packs, dry food, water filters. That night, under the glow of distant stars, John and Lyra sat side by side watching the sky, not speaking much, just existing in the quiet between survival and uncertainty. John finally asked something that had been burning inside him since the trial. "Do you think it's real?" Lyra looked at him. "What this?" he said. "Us, the bond. We didn't fake it, but we didn't exactly plan it either." She looked away, her voice low and careful. "I think what we felt was real, but real things don't always make sense, not at first, and not when they're surrounded by systems that only believe in results. I want it to be real," he said. "I want to believe this isn't just some scientific side effect." She turned back to him, and there was a soft smile on her lips. "Then believe it, because I do." The moment held between them long and heavy, like gravity itself had paused to let them feel something pure. Suddenly, the station shook lightly, a small vibration under their feet, and Lyra jumped up, moving to the console nearby, scanning the signals. "What is it?" he asked. "A patrol drone," she said. "Small, fast. It didn't see us, but it passed close." "We have less time than I thought." "Then we contact this Erevan guy now," said John. She nodded and began working on the signal interface. It was old and damaged, but functional, with enough power to send a short-range encrypted burst. She input a series of codes in her native language, then attached John's biosignature as proof. "It's sent," she said. "He'll know it's from me, and he'll know what it means. And if he doesn't answer, then we move again," she said. "We don't stop, we survive." They spent the next few hours repairing what they could, scanning the skies for threats, planning escape routes from a station that barely worked, but they didn't complain. They were alive, they were together, and they had done what no one believed was possible. They had escaped not just the council, but the role forced upon them. But somewhere deep in the black silence of space, something else had awakened, something watching, something waiting, and it was not going to let them go so easily. A new beginning. The small colony was hidden deep within a cluster of asteroids, far from the reach of the council and their endless wars. It was a place where humans and aliens lived quietly side by side, in fragile peace, not because they trusted each other, but because both knew survival depended on cooperation. John and Lyra arrived, weary but hopeful. The journey had tested their limits, and yet something stronger than fear had carried them through, a bond forged not by duty or science, but by choice and respecting. The center of the colony, a small clinic, hummed softly, its walls lined with devices old and new, where the future of two species would be born. Lyra rested on a soft bed, surrounded by gentle hands that treated her with kindness and care. Not as a vessel, but as a mother, as a person, as someone deserving dignity. John stood close, holding her hand, his eyes wide with a mix of awe and disbelief. The child growing inside was not just a life, it was a symbol of hope, of unity, of new beginnings. The weeks passed with slow, steady progress. The colony watched with quiet curiosity and growing acceptance as the hybrid child developed, strong and healthy, a miracle neither species thought possible. One evening, as twin suns set, casting gold across the horizon, John held the newborn in his arms, tiny fingers curling around his thumb. The child's eyes opened, revealing a strange, glowing mix of human warmth and alien light. Lyra smiled softly, tears shining in her eyes. "This is more than survival," she whispered. "This is a future." News from distant worlds began to spread, the council fractured by fear and resistance. While some tried to hunt the pair, others spoke in secret of alliances and change. John and Lyra became symbols, not of captivity but of courage and choice. Their story told in whispers and songs, a reminder that even in darkness, life finds a way. As the colony celebrated a new dawn, John looked at Lyra, knowing their journey was far from over, but together they had rewritten fate. From the ashes of extinction rose a new legacy, a legacy of love, freedom, and hope. The stars above shone brighter than ever, as if blessing the fragile family below. And in that light, John knew that this was only the beginning, the end.